We're still the same person you knew before. It doesn't magically change us into different people. It doesn't make us weak. It doesn't make us a liability. Life is messy, and so are our brains, and that's okay. If we have doctors that are making patients feel very uncomfortable and very judged, they're not going to open up about those embarrassing aspects. And that's one critical piece of the puzzle that is missing from the journey to diagnosis. My name is Liana Ruppert, and my health concern revolves around epilepsy. Epilepsy was something that came later in life for me. I didn't know that people weren't just born with it. That was something new. I was actually diagnosed due to an injury I experienced overseas when I was active duty military. And it's a symptom, not a cause, which I also didn't know about. It opened up this whole new world of discovery. But I was diagnosed, I want to say 10 years ago now. But I remember one time when I realized that something was very, very wrong was several months after the incident happened. We have what's called balls to 4 watch, which is midnight to 4 a.m. watch when you're on deployment at sea. And I was up in my little area on our ship. I was on the USS Harry S. Truman. And I noticed that I couldn't control my speaking. Like somebody came up to me, checked in, and I couldn't get my mouth to work at all. And I didn't know what that was. But I couldn't speak no matter how hard I tried. And then about an hour later, I just stayed in this room that had flickering lights for a really long time. And then eventually they moved into a much faster pattern. And then that was when I went into an episode, a full seizure. And that was my first real seizure. And I was by myself and I was very scared. And I was also very embarrassed because an unfortunate side effect of epilepsy, aside from the possibility of death, is sometimes incontinence is a thing, and I peed all over my uniform, and so I had to walk back from my station with gross camis, and it was very embarrassing, and I was very confused, and I didn't know what was happening. And in the military, they don't really care what's wrong with you. If you're alive and breathing, you're good to go. So I actually had to wait a couple more months, but they did pull me off of the boat and put me on shore leave so I could get tested, because as I was trying to fight through it, I couldn't walk sometimes. And then that was when the MS symptoms started to manifest. And I was actually on a cane and in a wheelchair for a good portion of that year as well. But it was a scary time, especially when you don't have the support to know and you don't have the resources. Because again, in media, epilepsy is this thing you're born with and you know exactly what it is. And it just happens randomly. And it's so much more complicated than that. Honestly affected every aspect of my life because I make music in my spare time, and therefore I love musical environments. So a lot of concerts that use strobing effects were suddenly off limits to me. As a huge gamer, I work in the gaming industry, have for about 20 years now. Suddenly my favorite games I can't play anymore. And I've even had seizures over commercials before. I remember there was an MTV The Challenge commercial that threw me into an epileptic episode. You only know what you know. Perception is reality, and my perception pre-epilepsy was nothing's off limits. I went from being this carefree, take life in, take entertainment in all forms, to really having to take a step back and be very aware of my body and my mind. It made it really hard because I was a journalist before my diagnosis. And again, having to navigate what I can and cannot enjoy, it definitely got a lot harder because a lot of games rely on flashy effects. That's just the nature of it. And so having to navigate when there's still a lot of stigma against it too, because you'll have bosses that will tell you, wink, wink, that they're okay with it and they will work with you. But in my personal experience, that's almost always not true. There is always going to be a prejudice there. You will always, not always, but you will sometimes, for me at least, I experienced that a lot, being pulled off of projects without my consent, being overlooked for many opportunities for things that wouldn't even be impacted by epilepsy, just because there is that stigma there of what is it? How does it interact? And are you just a liability? And I'm so glad now, because where I'm at now is very understanding. I was helping to review. Andrew Reiner at Game Informer was the reviewer, and then myself and Kimberly Wallace were supporting because it was just such a massive game. We were trying to get as much of it in our review process as we could. So we played different genders of E, different life paths, things like that. Before it launched, there was a sequence in a game called the Brand Dance sequence. The thing that was a problem with it is the machine that you put it is a direct replica of the machine that is used to detect seizures. And the problem was the brain dance sequence in Cyberpunk 2077 was an exact replica with that, including even how the light patterns with the flickering. What scared me was I went into a grand mal seizure, which is the most dangerous kind of seizure you can have, which is the type of seizure that I've almost died from in the past. And I was really lucky that I married a medic. But I had no warning. And that's very rare for me. I had no warning. I was fine. And then all of a sudden, I'm on the floor. And that really scared me because I'm like, okay, if it's that severe for me, this could even trigger an epileptic episode and a non-epileptic. But luckily, CD Projekt Red was very understanding. They reached out immediately. They consulted with me. We came up with a new animation that was much safer. It was great. But that was just one of those things that it did kind of put a trigger on my back a little bit at work because I felt like now PR was scared to reach out to me. And that's kind of another thing too, is I found myself in this position where I had to tell people my business. And then when the cyberpunk thing happened, I had like Washington Post covered it, Forbes covered it, Yahoo, suddenly it was everywhere with my name attached to my diagnosis. And I think for like 2 weeks after that, I wasn't really sleeping or eating. I was terrified because I'm like, well, crap. Like I had this target on my back just trying to say it one-on-one with people. Now the whole freaking world knows. And it was a learning experience, but I am proud of that learning experience because I am much more open now on social media, not only about epilepsy, but other issues like depression and anxiety. And when I was going through the Cyberpunk 2077 thing, people were sending me seizure-inducing gifts because they thought it was funny. And then the common question I got was, then why even play video games? Okay, so then why even play video games? Why even watch TV? Why even watch movies? Like, it's not as simple as just not doing it because triggers are everywhere. Am I supposed to move to Alaska because heat is a trigger? No. Am I supposed to never watch any form of entertainment unless it's audio only for the rest of my life because there is a small chance I could have a triggered epileptic episode? No, but that is a very common, almost the most common reaction I see daily, even from friends and family. These aren't just internet trolls. A lot of people want to condense it down to, oh, those are just trolls. No, it's not just trolls. I've heard that from friends and family before too, and it is ridiculous and it's not realistic. We don't want to shut people out. We want to help them learn to live with it. I actually went without my diagnosis for a year until they took me out to Bethesda, Maryland, which is like the Cancer Research Center of America. And I went from a year of daily doctor visits to 2 visits with them. He found out all of my triggers and was able to capture one on camera. But he was actually the one that noticed, like, oh, I noticed that a lot of your stories revolve around you being overheated. So we're going to try something. And he didn't tell me what they tried. I fell asleep. I have pictures too. I can send it to you if you want to put it on the screen or not, but it's so funny because I was like wrapped up and I just looked so stupid, but I was vibing. I was like hanging out with everybody. We were watching Twilight Zone. It was a good time. It was a 72-hour stay. It was just all hanging out, having a good old time, making a bad situation good. And they didn't tell me what they did, but they, with all of the headgear, they were able to monitor brainwave patterns. So when they noticed that I was asleep, like I was in REM sleep, they turned the heat way, way up. But I was asleep, so I consciously didn't know if there was any temperature change. There was no way I could, that was to protect the integrity of the test. And sure enough, like 10 minutes later, I had a full-on epileptic episode on camera because of that. They turned the heat back down, they came in, they administered medication. I didn't have to stay the full 22 days because we got the first thing we needed day 1. That is why it's really important to constantly keep in touch with your neurologist and also find a neurologist you trust, because some neurologists, they're jaded, they're burnt out. It happens. They're human just like the rest of us. Sometimes you get burnt out at work. So find one that you feel comfortable with, that makes you feel heard, so you feel safe enough to talk about any changes, because sometimes it does feel very vulnerable doing that. One thing that I like about, opportunities like this with the United Brain Association is the fact that it is very important to have people from different vocations, both hobby and professionally, speaking out about their personal experiences. It's very important. I will never say no to opportunities like this, because that public spotlight, again, helps with the normalization of it. And for me personally, my personal investment in it is I want people that follow me, whether they liked my work as a journalist or whether they're a fan of Destiny, I want them to look at me and be like, I have somebody in my corner. Should I experience the discrimination I've seen her go through? Or should I experience a place where I'm scared to speak up about my diagnosis? It's important because when you're visible like this, when you can see a person's face and you can see how they speak and you can see that they've gone through the same thing you're going through, it's so important. And yeah, it's absolutely vital. So I will never turn down stuff like this, because it means the world to me, because this was something that I didn't have when I was diagnosed. And I don't ever want anybody to feel the level of loneliness and hopelessness that I felt during that time, because it was very dark.